What's up, everybody? Good morning, and we're taking another short detour from the outgoing Seahawks free agents to instead take a look at our new defensive coordinator because, look, I know that we don't necessarily have a huge amount of responsibility on him this year. He's got Mike McDonald calling the defense, making the play calls, designing the defense. You've got Leslie Frazier in there advising. I think we all understand that Aden Durde is not going to have a massive hand in forming this defense here in Seattle for this year. Now, down the line, that can change. Leslie Frazier might be a 1 year guy. And then at that point, you might actually have some more responsibilities for him, especially if he does well with whatever he's given in 2024. But for now, I think we all understand that there's only so much he's going to be able to impact here. So, Aden Durde, I want to talk about the resume because I'm sure there's something he's going to do. And I want to talk about the last 3 years in particular here because I get the sense that people aren't fully grasping how impressive a job he's done over the last 3 years while a member of the Cowboys coaching staff under Dan Quinn. Now, obviously, I've talked at length before about how that Cowboys defense was atrocious, and then Dan Quinn and his boys got there in 2021 and made them immediately really, really good. The last 3 years, they've been, I think, top 5 in scoring and top 3 in EPA per play. So it's been a huge turnaround because that defense was one of the worst in the league in 2020 before Quinn and his boys got there. So on a macro level, yeah, things are happening in Dallas that were good over the last 3 years defensively, and Aden Durde was part of that. Because before Dallas, Aden Durde was in Atlanta for 3 years under Quinn. He was a defensive quality control coach for 2 years for two defenses that were not very good. Then he was the outside linebacker coach for a year for a defense that was really bad. So I'm not really looking at that stuff. That stuff not crazy impressive. That stuff's just kind of like, whatever. You're building a little bit of experience. But I want to highlight some of the players that Aden Durde has coached over the last 3 seasons as the Cowboys defensive line guy. And most people will know about the big ones, but I want to talk about the little ones too because there's some notable names here. Some guys who have been playing really well, guys who have been playing better than they have before or better than expected, beyond just the guys at the very top. So I just want to highlight the fact that this guy has done a really good job. So last 3 years, some of the defensive linemen, actually most of the defensive linemen that have passed through Dallas, obviously the big one that everybody knows is Micah Parsons. Technically not a defensive lineman, but plays a lot on the defensive line. I think we all understand that. He's a linebacker, but he plays on the defensive line frequently. You would have a hard time naming 5 defensive players over the last 3 years that have been better or as good even as Micah Parsons. Like TJ Watt, excuse me, Bosa, Myles Garrett. Kind of hard to name anybody else. Like, those guys are in a very, very special group. 40 and a half sacks over the last 3 years, 213 tackles, 51 for loss, 131 pressures according to PFR. So he's been a nonstop wall-to-wall monster for that Cowboys defense. Made 3 Pro Bowls, 2 first-team All-Pros, 1 second-team All-Pro this most recent year. PFF grades off the charts, 90, 92, 93, basically. I mean, you guys know how good Micah Parsons has been. I don't need to sell you on Micah Parsons, but while Micah Parsons is a very talented individual, it is worth noting he was not like this in college. In college, he was just kind of a typical linebacker. The process of bringing this ability out of Micah Parsons is noteworthy and impressive on the part of the coaches as well, Dan Quinn and Aden Durde. So Micah Parsons could have gone a completely different direction in the NFL, I think. He could have found a coaching staff that didn't realize what they had. And he found one that did, and he's been about as dominant can be for the last 3 seasons on every level. So I don't think this is just a pure talent thing. I think this is a coaching thing as well. Next guy I want to look at here, the other guy that most people know about, DeMarcus Lawrence, over the last 3 years. By the way, he missed like 10 games in 2021. 13 sacks, 136 tackles, 24 for loss, 47 pressures. made the Pro Bowl the last 2 seasons. So the 2 seasons he's actually played, I think, every game or close to every game. He's made the Pro Bowl. PFF grade was 91 in 2021. That was the 7-game season he had. 78.1 in 2022, and then big numbers in 2023, 91.3. Now, the sack numbers are not huge, but as an all-around overall player, DeMarcus Lawrence has been fantastic under the tutelage of Quinn and Durde. And the thing that's worth noting is that DeMarcus Lawrence was a very high-profile player in like 2017 and 2018. He made the Pro Bowl. And then he went through a few years where he didn't seem like he was quite the same player, not having the same impact. Seemed like he might be past that level of dominance. And under Durde, he's gotten back. So DeMarcus Lawrence was a player who looked like he was on the downturn of his career, somebody who was going to be overpaid, a contract albatross. And under the tutelage of Dan Quinn and Aden Durde, he has had a bounce back. And I know the sack numbers are not huge, but it's hard to beat Micah Parsons to the quarterback. And DeMarcus Lawrence offers phenomenal run defense on top of his pass rush abilities. And, I mean, I do think that the Pro Bowls are relatively legitimate. I do think that he deserved to be considered one of the best defensive players in the NFL. And he's also a little bit of a reclamation project in a way. He was always good, but I feel like the last 3 years he's kind of regained his former self. Next guy I want to look at would be Osa Odigizua. This is a third-round pick from 2021, the Micah Parsons draft, and he's come along pretty nicely. This is one of the more impressive things that Cowboys coaching staff was able to do. They took a third-round pick like Odigizua and have turned him into a capable player. 9 sacks, 125 tackles over 3 seasons, 23 for loss, 39 pressures. And look at the development. First year, PFF grade, not even 49, 48.5. Awful. Next year, he improved significantly, playable, 63.3. And then this most recent year, he's really good. PFF loves him, 81.4. Part of an elite defense this year. A bigger part of an elite defense this year than previously. So, Odigizua develops fantastically under the tutelage of Durde. So, I look at this and I go, it's not just the Micah Parsons, it's not just the DeMarcus Lawrences. You're also seeing more fringe players develop into quality pieces under his tutelage, under his coaching. Another good example might be Dorrance Armstrong Jr. Over the last 3 years, 21 sacks, 108 tackles, 20 for loss, 55 pressures. Now, Dorrance Armstrong Jr. was a player of some note before Quinn and Durde got a hold of him, but he's still become a much more prolific player under their coaching. You can see a little bit of development as well. This most recent year, highest PFF grade of his career, 70.1. So, Dorrance Armstrong Jr. coming along nicely under that coaching staff in Dallas. Sam Williams. Now, Sam Williams is a bit of an idiot. He's got like 3 running into the returner penalties this year alone. But as a defensive player, when he's able to get his head on straight, you can see that he is coming along kind of nicely here. He was a rookie in 2022. Again, you're competing with guys like Lawrence and Parsons and even a guy like Dorrance Armstrong Jr. for sacks. And 8.5 in 2 years, 48 tackles, 15 tackles for loss, 21 pressures, 2 pretty decent PFF grades. He's a nice rotational piece for that defense. Respectable contributions as a young defender behind a lot of really, really good players on that defensive line. You can kind of see the development. Jonathan Hankins. Now, Jonathan Hankins technically played a little bit for the Cowboys in 2022, but this is just 2023 here because he barely played. Last year, he signed up with the Cowboys now. He's a flawed player for sure. He's one of those guys who's like 360 pounds and he keeps getting work because of it. Typically speaking, he's not really a great player, but there is a noticeable difference in that Cowboys run defense when Hankins is in versus when Hankins is out. So last year, 3 sacks, 27 tackles, 2 for loss, 3 pressures, and there's an impact there. I know PFF doesn't like him, 51.8 is not good, but there's impact there that I don't think Hankins has really been able to have in several years in the NFL. So even on the level of something like Jonathan Hankins, which I'm not going to, sing the praises of that too much, but you're seeing the positive impact of this coaching staff on many different players on many different levels. It's not just the Micah Parsonses. It's the Dorrance Armstrongs and the Jonathan Hankins. Chauncey Golston, been part of that Cowboys team the last 3 years. Not huge contributions. We're talking 3.5 sacks in 3 years, but 79 tackles, 20 pressures. He's out there contributing. He's out there developing into a decent piece. He was somebody who was pretty pretty small time player before he hooked up in Dallas with Quinn and Durde. 60 PFF grade, 68 in 2022, and then 63 this most recent year. Just churning along, providing valuable depth for a really good defense. You got a guy like Dante Fowler Jr., who, well, some people would have said his career is about over. He tore his, was it ACL or Achilles in, I think it was Atlanta, and was basically out there. Anybody could have had him. There wasn't a lot of interest. They pick him up in 2022. Over the last 2 years, he's got 10 sacks, 40 tackles, 33 pressures. PFF grades starting to slowly build themselves back up to a respectable level after, I think in Atlanta, it was much worse than this. So you're seeing the relevant impact of these of this coaching staff on these players. So where there's been a little bit of an issue, I think, is the attempts to find the big run stuffer in the middle. Like Neville Gallimore kind of embodies that really well. He's been there for 3 years, and he really has not developed that well. You would also kind of sub in a guy like Quinton Bohanna here, or a guy like Mazi Smith now. These are guys that the Cowboys have brought in hoping they would just be able to be space eaters in the middle, kind of guys who would help stuff the run. And the best they've gotten, really, is Jonathan Hankins. Hankins has done more than those guys. Neville Gallimore has done more than Mazi Smith or Quinton Bohanna, especially on the front of Mazi Smith. That is obviously very surprising. And you can see that Gallimore has not been great. 3.5 sacks in 3 years, 62 tackles, 8 pressures. PFF grade's not good, although there was significant improvement, I guess, in 2023. So for him, that's impressive. But that is kind of the one blind spot of the 3 years in Dallas. They weren't able to find that really good, dominant run stuffer, a big trash can full of dirt in the middle to just eat up space. So that is the one thing that I'm looking at and going, well, that if there's anything wrong with this resume, it's probably that. The good news is Mike Macdonald has been working with some really good nose tackles for the last couple of years in Baltimore, so I'm not too worried about it on that front. But you can see that is where things are lacking, because in terms of finding guys who can just play on that defensive line, he's had no problems, both on the superstar level, the star level, and the role player level. Carlos Watkins, 58 tackles over 2 years in Dallas, 7 for loss, only the 1 sack. But again, guy who did not play that much because he had so much good stuff in front of him. 1 okay PFF grade, 1 not so okay, and then he went to Arizona last year. Terrell Basham, 39 tackles, 3 for loss, 21 pressures in 2021 alone. He was only there for 1 year, 3.5 sacks, not bad. Decent PFF score. And I think he moved on and hasn't really done that much since then, if I recall correctly. And Randy Gregory, remember Randy Gregory? He pieces together one pretty decent year in Dallas in 2021, 6 sacks, 19 tackles, 29 pressures. Gets a huge contract from Denver and doesn't really do all that much. Gets hurt, gets washed up real quick, gets cut, finds himself in San Fran on a last-second trade. I mean, Randy Gregory, his career is kind of circling the drain here, and the Cowboys were able to get some respectable things out of him right before the clock struck 0 on his career. So even on that level, I'm seeing stuff here that I like. So there's a mosaic, an absolute array of impressive things that Aden Durde has touched over the last 3 years. Now again, Dan Quinn has a background in defensive line stuff as well, so I'm sure he has something to do with it. But Dan Quinn was the guy who said, hey, I want Aden Durde on my coaching staff. And Aden Durde's been there for the last 3 years, and what's he done wrong other than a failure to develop a big nose tackle? Like, Bohanna was a 6th round pick, so that's understandable. Mazi Smith not developing at all as a rookie is troublesome. Gallimore's been there a little while too, so the fact that he's not developing is kind of a problem, but look at all the good stuff here. It definitely outweighs the negative. So that's my rundown of Aden Durde from my perspective, as near as can be deduced. And there's only so much we can do from the outside looking in. Seems like Aden Durde's nice. Seems like he's got a lot to the table, bringing a lot to the table here as a coach. And I'm excited to have him on board. So let me know what you guys think. I'm going to get out of here. More videos coming later today. Go Hawks, and see you soon.